The early morning light spilled across the glass panels of Cascade Regional Airport, casting golden hues over the busy terminal. At 34, Claire Whitmore moved with effortless confidence. Her blonde hair was tucked beneath a plain black baseball cap, her toned frame dressed in a dark gray hoodie and soft, light gray joggers. The only accessory she wore was a delicate silver bracelet, simple, understated, and meaningful. To the average passerby, she looked like any other traveler opting for comfort over fashion on a long-haul flight. There was nothing about her appearance to hint at her marriage to Julian Whitmore, the billionaire tech visionary who had recently acquired Sky Vista Air as part of his ever-expanding transportation empire. Claire checked the time on her wrist, a vintage watch that had once belonged to her grandmother. She still had plenty of time before boarding for Flight 934 to Eastridge, where her parents were hosting a gathering to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. Julian had offered the use of their private jet, but Claire had politely declined. Every now and then, she chose to travel like everyone else. It was her way of staying grounded, tethered to the real world that their wealth could so easily shelter her from. "Just a plain black coffee, please," she said to the barista at a small cafe near the gate. She pulled a few crumpled bills from her pocket instead of flashing the high-limit metal card tucked into her phone case. "Heading somewhere nice?" the young man behind the counter asked with a smile. "Eastridge." "Family celebration," Claire replied, placing the change into the tip jar. "Well, have a great flight." Coffee in hand, Claire walked slowly toward Gate C-18, sipping as she went. Her eyes wandered, observing the mosaic of people around her: parents juggling toddlers, elderly couples holding hands, business travelers glued to their laptops. She had always been fascinated by these passing snapshots of humanity. Maybe it was because she herself had grown up in a modest rural town in northern Oregon, the daughter of a public school teacher and a mechanic. Years before she'd ever met Julian at a sustainability tech conference, where she'd been speaking about environmental policy, this world had been her own. The boarding area began to stir as the announcement came through the speakers. Now boarding first-class passengers for Sky Vista Air Flight 934 to Eastridge. Claire adjusted the strap of her time-worn canvas backpack and stood. There were no Louis Vuitton rollers or monogrammed totes slung over her shoulder. Just her dependable carry-on, scarred and well-loved. She joined the short priority line where a man in a sharp navy suit took one look at her relaxed attire, blinked, then subtly did a double-take. She was used to that by now. The raised eyebrows, the once-overs. They didn't faze her anymore. "Boarding pass, please," said the gate agent with a courteous but automated smile. Claire offered her phone, and the screen flashed green as the scanner beeped. The woman's smile flickered, just for a moment, when she saw the first-class designation next to Claire's name. Her eyes lifted to meet Claire's face, then drifted briefly over her casual outfit. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. Enjoy your flight." Claire gave a polite nod and made her way down the jet bridge. She didn't know it yet, but the simple decision to prioritize comfort over image that morning would trigger a series of events that would shake the very foundation of Sky Vista Air. Inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere whispered wealth and refinement. Wide, plush leather seats in deep ocean blue lined the cabin, separated by polished mahogany partitions. Champagne flutes sparkled on trays. Ambient lighting glowed softly above. As Claire stepped inside, a flight attendant named Lauren Hayes looked up from her station. The smile on her face paused, barely noticeably, as her eyes met the figure in front of her. The woman standing there certainly didn't look like she belonged in this section. "Good morning," Claire said with warmth, holding her boarding pass. "Seat 2A, by the window." Lauren's penciled brows arched ever so slightly. "First class is to your left," she said with practiced politeness, her tone lined with skepticism. "Yes," Claire replied calmly. "I know. Thank you." With a quiet poise, Claire walked down the aisle toward her seat, acutely aware of Lauren's gaze following her. The first-class cabin was about half full, men in tailored suits, a woman in a silk blouse scrolling through stock alerts, and a celebrity chef Claire recognized from a travel show. She stowed her backpack in the overhead compartment and slid into her seat, pulling a well-worn paperback from the side pocket rather than reaching for a tablet or sleek laptop. A moment later, a male flight attendant approached. His badge read Evan Brooks, and his neatly groomed appearance matched the sleek decor of the cabin. His tone was courteous, but his words carried an edge. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" Claire looked up, meeting his guarded expression with calm clarity. "Of course." She held out her phone again, the digital boarding pass still on screen. Evan examined it longer than necessary, his eyes flicking back and forth between the pass and her appearance. "One moment, please." Claire watched as he walked toward the galley, where he began whispering to Lauren. Both glanced back at her discreetly, though the subtlety was thinly veiled. The man across the aisle tried to appear disinterested, but she could feel his curiosity like static in the air. She exhaled slowly, her fingers resting on the edge of her book. She had seen this unfold before. Different settings, same story. The unspoken question lingered. "You sure you're supposed to be here?" And this, she knew, was just the beginning. "One moment, please," said Evan Brooks. His voice clipped as he turned and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. Claire Whitmore watched him with quiet restraint as he leaned in to speak with Lauren Hayes near the galley. Both of them shot glances in her direction, their hushed conversation carrying the kind of urgency that came wrapped in judgment. Across the aisle, a suited man attempted to feign disinterest behind the raised wall of his newspaper, but his stolen looks gave him away. Claire had seen this scene play out before, only the costumes and backdrop changed. She let out a slow breath, her fingers still resting on the closed cover of her paperback. Moments later, Lauren returned. This time, she wasn't alone. A taller woman accompanied her, her navy blazer crisply tailored, and her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Her name tag, pinned squarely above her pocket, read Camille Stratton, and her air of authority made it clear she was the senior crew member on board. "Ma'am," Camille began, her voice precise and practiced, though noticeably cooler than Lauren's. "There appears to be a bit of confusion regarding your seat." Claire calmly placed her book down on the armrest. "There's no confusion," she said. "I'm in 2A, first class." Camille's smile thinned, her professionalism tightening like a seam under pressure. "Our system occasionally misassigns seats," she replied. "This is a first-class cabin and you don't think I belong here?" Claire finished, her tone even, not raised, but unmistakably firm. Camille blinked. A subtle flicker of discomfort passed through her otherwise polished expression. "Not at all. We simply need to verify—" "You've already scanned my boarding pass," Claire interrupted. "Twice. It clearly shows this seat was assigned to me." The air in the cabin changed. The quiet murmurs of passengers had shifted into something more pointed, heads turning, eyes watching. From the side, Evan reappeared, arms folded across his chest, wearing an expression that suggested he'd seen this kind of thing go down before. And from the way he stood, he seemed to already know how it would end. "Perhaps you were upgraded in error?" Lauren suggested, a faint smirk in her voice betraying just how unlikely she thought that was. "Or perhaps," Claire said smoothly, "I purchased a first-class ticket. Is there a dress code I missed?" Camille hesitated for a beat too long. "There's no official dress code." "No," she said finally, though her tone was clearly beginning to fray. "However, our first-class guests typically present themselves in a way that aligns with the premium experience." Claire held her gaze. "So, this isn't about the ticket. It's about how I look." From across the aisle, an older gentleman cleared his throat. "I've flown in sweatpants dozens of times," he said mildly. "Never once been asked to justify it." Camille turned sharply toward him. "Sir, this matter is being handled by our crew." "It shouldn't be happening at all," he cut in, before casually returning to his reading. Lauren leaned closer to Camille, whispering something under her breath. Camille gave a quick nod and stepped forward again. "Ma'am," she said, now more clipped. We have a full flight this morning, and we must ensure all passengers are in their correct assigned seats. Our system shows this seat is meant for a C. Whitmore. That's correct, Claire replied coolly. Claire Whitmore. Evan stepped closer. Do you have identification to confirm that? He asked, his tone laced with a hint of triumph, as if he were about to catch her in some elaborate lie. Claire held her composure, though she felt her patience thinning. No other passenger has been asked to show ID after boarding, she pointed out. The gate agent verified my pass. You scanned it. Twice. It's standard procedure when there's a discrepancy, Camille said quickly. What discrepancy, exactly? Claire asked. Besides the fact that I'm not dressed the way you expect someone in this seat to be? A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their plush seats. Someone in the back murmured something, followed by the quiet sound of agreement. One woman leaned over to her companion and whispered just loudly enough for Claire to hear, If she bought the ticket, what's the issue? Camille's jaw tightened. Ma'am, if you can't verify your identity, we'll need to reassign you to an economy seat. Claire straightened in her seat. I can verify my identity, but I shouldn't have to. Not when no one else has been asked the same. Miss Whitmore, Evan said, the barest hint of sarcasm curling around her name. We're simply following protocol. No, Claire said firmly. You're following your bias. If I were wearing pearls and a cashmere scarf, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Camille's forced smile slipped away entirely. This is becoming disruptive, she said stiffly. Either show your ID, or we'll move you to the main cabin. Claire glanced around the cabin. The atmosphere now felt like a spotlight. Some passengers watched with growing sympathy. Others observed with the kind of detached curiosity reserved for viral moments. It was the silent theater of public discomfort, awkward and invasive. She could end it all. One sentence about Julian Whitmore, and they'd probably scramble to bring her champagne and apologies. But that wasn't how Claire lived her life. She had never used her husband's name as leverage. Not in boardrooms, not in restaurants, and certainly not on airplanes. This is discrimination, she said clearly. I paid for this seat like everyone else. Ma'am, Camille said, her tone colder now. We need to complete boarding. Your options are provide identification, move to economy, or deplane. The injustice of it blazed inside Claire like wildfire, but she also recognized the trap. Either escalate and cause a delay for everyone, or concede and move quietly. She took a steady breath, the humiliation pressing on her chest like weight. Fine, she said at last, her voice steady. I'll move. But then she looked Camille directly in the eyes. I want your full names and employee numbers. This isn't over. Claire didn't flinch, even as the sting of humiliation pressed into her ribs like cold metal. Fine, she said at last. I'll move. But I want your names. And your employee numbers. This isn't over. Evan Brooks gave the faintest smirk. We'll find you a seat in economy, he said, voice dripping with smug professionalism. And we'll make sure to compensate you for the fare difference. I don't want compensation, Claire said, her voice steady as she gathered her worn backpack. I want accountability. As she stood, she caught the eyes of a few first-class passengers. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others looked away with practiced indifference, their discomfort an admission of complicity. The older gentleman who had defended her earlier shook his head, dismayed. What followed didn't feel like a standard cabin reassignment. It felt like a quiet expulsion. With Lauren Hayes walking just ahead of her, Claire made her way down the aisle, past rows of polished mahogany and neatly folded linens. Whispers trailed in her wake like echoes in a high-ceilinged hall. Eyes followed her, some with curiosity, some with shame. She walked tall. This way, Lauren said, gesturing toward a cramped row in the economy cabin. Middle seat. We apologize for any inconvenience. Claire looked directly at her. No, she said calmly. You don't. But you might, soon enough. By the next morning, The sun rose bright and unforgiving over the glass and steel silhouette of Sky Vista Air's headquarters in Cascade City. The building gleamed in the daylight, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered ridges, a sleek symbol of the company's lofty image. Inside the executive suite, Naomi Trask, the airline's chief customer officer, sat hunched over a stack of reports, her jaw tightening with each line she read. She flipped through bar charts and internal reviews, frowning deeper. Customer complaints had risen by over 11% since the previous quarter. The most common theme: staff attitude. Across the room, her assistant reminded her, "The board meeting starts at 10. And Mr. Whitmore has confirmed he'll be attending in person." Naomi's stomach churned. Julian Whitmore, billionaire tech entrepreneur and the airline's new owner, had taken control of Sky Vista just 9 months prior. Since then, he'd remained a distant, if quietly influential figure. Today, however, he would be attending the quarterly review face-to-face, for the first time. And his reputation for excellence was legendary. His patience for excuses, non-existent. "Make sure Camille Stratton and her first-class cabin crew are present," Naomi instructed. "They've had the strongest satisfaction scores. Let's lead with our wins." Across town, Julian adjusted the knot of his tie in the mirror. The morning light filtered softly through the windows of their penthouse suite, perched high above Cascade City's skyline. His navy suit was tailored but understated. His posture, as always, was commanding, built on years of boardrooms, breakthroughs, and billion-dollar negotiations. Behind him, Claire sat on the edge of the bed, still in her signature gray hoodie and joggers, tying the laces of her worn sneakers. "You're sure you don't want me to address it directly?" Julian asked, catching her reflection in the glass. "This isn't about revenge," Claire replied softly. "It's about changing a mindset, a culture." "They humiliated my wife," he said, his jaw tightening. "That feels pretty personal to me." Claire stood, walked to him, and gently smoothed the already perfect lines of his tie. "I know, and I love you for that. But this is bigger than me, or those 3 crew members. This is about a system that judges people based on surface, not substance." He met her gaze. He had always admired that about her, her unshakable sense of what truly mattered. Despite the luxury that now surrounded her, Claire hadn't lost her clarity. She hadn't forgotten where she came from. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll do it your way." He checked his watch. "Meeting starts in an hour." "I'm ready," Claire said, "and I'll be wearing exactly what I wore yesterday." At Sky Vista's headquarters, the large conference room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Department heads, board members, and senior staff trickled in, whispering about the rare appearance of the company's elusive new owner. Near the back of the room, Camille Stratton, Evan Brooks, and Lauren Hayes sat together, immaculate in uniform, poised and expectant. They hadn't been told why they were invited to the high-level meeting, but Camille had her theories. "This has to be about the Elite Service Initiative," she whispered. "We're their top-scoring team." "We'd be the obvious leads," Evan added, brushing lint from his sleeve. Lauren nodded in agreement, smoothing down the front of her jacket. "I heard the owner's finally showing up in person." "Big opportunity," Camille said. A hush fell over the room as Naomi Trask stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "As you know, customer experience is the heart of our brand at Sky Vista Air. Today, we'll be reviewing key metrics and identifying paths for improvement." As she spoke, the doors opened. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Julian Whitmore entered the room, his presence unmistakable, measured, controlled, and quietly powerful. He took a seat at the head of the table. The air around him changed. "Please continue," he said to Naomi. She nodded and launched into the presentation. Graphs, percentages, highlighted wins. She spoke of the transcontinental first-class routes, praising their 92% satisfaction score. "In fact," she said, voice lifting with enthusiasm, We've asked the lead members of our highest-performing first-class team to join us today. Camille Stratton and her crew have consistently delivered above industry standards. Camille rose with quiet pride, walking to the front of the room. At Sky Vista, she began. We believe that the first-class experience begins the moment a passenger steps aboard. Our role is to curate a seamless, premium journey, one that reflects exclusivity, respect, and care. She didn't notice when the door opened again. But premium isn't just about comfort, she continued. It's about reading our passengers, understanding who they are, and anticipating their needs. Julian's attention had shifted. His eyes were fixed on someone just outside the frame of Camille's words. Camille glanced over, then stopped mid-sentence. Standing in the doorway was Clare Whitmore, dressed exactly as she had been the day before. The hoodie, the joggers, the black cap, the same quiet strength in her posture. Camille froze. Recognition hit her like a sudden drop in altitude. Behind her, Evan and Lauren also turned, and their expressions drained of color. Julian stood. Apologies for the interruption, he said, though there was no apology in his voice. I believe some of you may have already met my wife, Clare Whitmore. The room turned to stone. Eyes darted, mouths parted. Confusion and shock rippled through the executive ranks. Naomi blinked. Your wife? Yes, Julian replied, his tone calm and sharp as glass. Claire flew with us yesterday, on Flight 934, first class. Claire stepped beside him, her silver bracelet catching the light, the only outward shimmer of wealth on her. Camille, Julian said, turning to the now pale flight attendant, you were just explaining how you anticipate the needs of premium passengers. Please continue. Camille opened her mouth, but nothing came out. This could be our big opportunity, Evan Brooks whispered, shifting slightly in his seat. Shh, Camille Stratton muttered, casting a glance toward the front of the executive conference room. Naomi Trask had just stepped up to the podium, tapping her notes lightly against the table as the murmurs faded. Thank you all for joining us today, Naomi began. As you know, customer experience remains the cornerstone of Sky Vista Air's brand identity. Today, we'll be reviewing quarterly performance metrics and identifying areas for continued improvement. The room settled into focused silence as the presentation began. Just as Naomi was introducing the next slide, the conference doors opened, and in walked Julian Whitmore. Tall, composed, and radiating the quiet authority of someone who'd built a tech empire from scratch, he moved through the room with measured steps. Conversation ceased. Even Naomi's voice caught for a second before she recovered. Mr. Whitmore, she greeted, we're honored to have you with us. Julian gave a respectful nod and took his place at the head of the table. Please, continue. Naomi launched into her slides, carefully emphasizing areas of growth and success, while softening the concerns with vague corporate language. Julian, for his part, remained unreadable. He took the occasional note in a small, leather-bound notebook, his pen moving with precision. And now, Naomi said, her voice lifting, I'd like to highlight one of our brightest departments. Our first-class service team on transcontinental routes has achieved an impressive 92% satisfaction rating, well above the industry average. She gestured toward the back of the room. We're joined today by members of that team. Camille Stratton, our senior first-class cabin manager, along with Evan Brooks and Lauren Hayes. Julian glanced at the trio for the first time, his expression revealing nothing. In fact, Naomi continued, I've asked Camille to briefly share what makes her team's approach to premium service so successful. Camille stood with confidence, adjusting the edges of her blazer as she walked toward the front. Thank you, Naomi. She turned to address the boardroom. At Sky Vista Air, Camille began, we believe that the first-class experience starts the moment a passenger steps on board. We're trained to quickly identify and cater to the needs of our premium travelers, those who expect a standard of service that reflects exclusivity and elegance. Behind her, The conference room door clicked open quietly. Camille continued, unaware. From personalized greetings to maintaining the refined atmosphere of our first-class cabin, we pay attention to every detail. How a guest carries themselves, what their expectations may be. Her words faltered. She'd noticed that Julian's attention had shifted, his eyes no longer on her, but fixed somewhere behind her. Camille turned. Standing at the doorway, calm and composed in her familiar dark gray hoodie and joggers, was Clare Whitmore. Recognition hit Camille like a jolt. For a moment, her brain couldn't process the scene. Then it clicked. The woman from yesterday's flight. The one whose identity she had questioned. The one she had escorted to economy like an imposter. From the back of the room, Lauren and Evan both went rigid, their earlier confidence draining like color from their faces. Julian stood slowly. "I apologize for the interruption," he said evenly, though his tone left no doubt he was anything but sorry. "I believe some of you may already know my wife, Clare Whitmore." The room fell into a stunned silence. Camille stood frozen at the front, her polished presentation now hanging awkwardly in the air. Lauren stared at the table. Evan's smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a tight, pale expression. "Your wife?" Naomi managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Julian said with deceptive calm. "Claire flew from Cascade City to Eastridge yesterday, on one of our flights, first class." Each word hit like a hammer. Claire moved forward, taking her place beside her husband. She wore the same exact outfit she'd been wearing on the flight. Her silver bracelet caught the overhead light, a small but unmistakable detail. "Perhaps," Julian said, turning to Camille, "you'd like to continue explaining your team's process for identifying premium travelers." Camille opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Her carefully crafted speech was in pieces now, useless shards on the floor of the moment. Evan and Lauren sat motionless, their expressions frozen somewhere between guilt and panic. There must have been a misunderstanding," Camille stammered finally. Julian raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding," he repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words. He turned to Claire. "Would you call it that?" Claire stepped forward, her voice calm but unwavering. "No," she said clearly. "What happened yesterday wasn't a misunderstanding. It was bias. I was judged, not by my boarding pass, which was scanned and verified multiple times, but by my appearance." She turned to look directly at the crew. "You saw joggers, a hoodie, no designer accessories, and you assumed I didn't belong. You questioned my identity in front of a full cabin, and when I stood my ground, you threatened to move me or remove me. And ultimately, you humiliated me by marching me back to economy like a fraud." The room remained still. No one dared to speak. Claire glanced around the table, at the executives, the board members, the silent observers. "And the truth is," she said, "this wasn't just about me. I've since learned of others, passengers in similar situations, treated like they didn't belong because of what they wore or how they looked." Julian looked out over the room. His voice, low and deliberate, carried the weight of the moment. "This isn't just about one team. It's about culture, a mindset that assumes worth based on wardrobe. It's systemic. What happened yesterday," Clare Whitmore said, her voice carrying through the silent conference room, "was not a misunderstanding. It was bias in action." She stood beside her husband, facing the 3 crew members seated near the back. Her eyes locked onto Camille Stratton, Evan Brooks, and Lauren Hayes. "I was judged, not by my boarding pass, which you scanned multiple times, but by my appearance. You decided I didn't belong in first class because I didn't fit the image you associate with passengers who deserve to be there. You questioned my identity, something you did to no one else. Then you threatened to remove me and ultimately humiliated me by walking me down that aisle, back to economy, in front of a cabin full of strangers." A tense, uncomfortable silence followed. A board member cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitmore," he said cautiously, "perhaps this matter would be better addressed in private." No, Julian Whitmore replied firmly, his gaze sweeping the room. This is exactly what this meeting should be about. He paused. Let me be clear. I'm not speaking today as an outraged husband, though I certainly am one. I'm here as the owner of this airline, deeply concerned about a culture that makes assumptions about people based on how they look, rather than treating every customer with equal respect. Across the room, Naomi Trask sat rigid in her seat, her face pale. Mr. Whitmore, she began, her voice cracking slightly, I can assure you this incident doesn't reflect our company's values. Doesn't it? Claire interjected gently. Because after I was removed from first class, I spoke with other employees, and what I heard wasn't unique. She reached into her bag and placed a slim folder on the center of the conference table. A teenager in a hoodie, ticketed for business class, was asked to verify his seat 3 times. A disabled passenger was told she was in the wrong line for priority boarding. An older woman in casual clothes was denied entry to the first-class lounge, even though she had valid access. Claire's eyes moved across the table. 27 documented incidents, all within the past 3 months, all following the same pattern. The room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Naomi reached for the folder with trembling hands. I had no idea, she whispered. And that's the problem, Julian said. You should have. These complaints were submitted, but they were labeled as misunderstandings, buried in the feedback system, and never escalated. For a moment, no one moved. Finally, Camille spoke, her voice strained but attempting professionalism. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, on behalf of our team, I offer our sincerest apologies for what happened. There are protocols we're expected to follow when verifying identity. Stop, Claire said quietly, but with unwavering strength. You're still missing the point. This wasn't about protocol. When the man in 2C flew in sweatpants last month, did you ask him for ID? When the celebrity in 1A boarded wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, did you question her right to be there? She let the silence answer. The problem isn't the rule, Claire continued. It's how you apply it, selectively. Evan Brooks, sensing the collapse of his own narrative, leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, voice strained, there was no way for us to know who you were. Exactly, Claire said, meeting his eyes. You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic dignity. My value as a passenger isn't defined by my husband, my account balance, or my outfit. I paid for my seat, just like everyone else. A deep, heavy silence settled in, as the truth of her words echoed through the room. Julian turned back to the 3 flight attendants. Your actions yesterday, he said evenly, demonstrated poor judgment and clear bias. In most companies, that would be grounds for immediate dismissal. Camille, Evan, and Lauren sat straighter, bracing for impact. But, Julian continued, terminating you would fix nothing long-term. It might satisfy our frustration, but it wouldn't address the deeper issue. It would allow the larger culture that enabled this to remain intact. He looked around the table, his tone shifting from disappointment to leadership. Starting next week, Sky Vista Air will launch a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all customer-facing employees. Gate agents, flight attendants, lounge staff, everyone. Naomi nodded, recovering her voice. We'll also be revising our feedback system to specifically track incidents related to bias or discrimination and ensure they're addressed at the leadership level. Claire stepped forward again, facing Camille, Evan, and Lauren directly. The 3 of you will be temporarily reassigned. 1 month working in our customer advocacy team, handling actual complaints, reading them, responding to them, listening. She paused. Then, 1 month working economy service. No champagne, no exclusivity, just people, real people, trying to get where they're going. If your reviews after that period show true growth, Julian added, you can reapply for your first-class roles. This isn't punishment. It's opportunity. A chance to learn and grow. None of the 3 crew members spoke. But in their eyes, The shock had turned to something more complicated. Reflection, humility, fear, and maybe something else. Recognition. Claire turned back to the room. The true measure of premium service isn't how you treat someone who looks important, she said, her voice soft but clear. It's how you treat someone when you don't know who they are. I'll personally oversee the implementation of these changes, Naomi Trask said, her voice stronger now, though still tinged with guilt. And I believe we should compensate the passengers listed in your report, Mrs. Whitmore. They deserve acknowledgement. Julian Whitmore nodded in agreement, then turned to face the flight attendants directly. This was never about punishment, he said. It's about understanding. The real test of premium service isn't how well you treat people who look important. It's how you treat everyone, regardless of appearance. As the weight of the situation fully settled in, Margot Chen, chair of the board, spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear and deliberate. I believe we owe Mrs. Whitmore our thanks, she said. She's exposed a serious blind spot in how we operate, one that, if left unchecked, would have continued harming our reputation and alienating loyal customers. In the back of the room, Camille, Evan, and Lauren sat in stunned silence. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced not by fear of termination, but by something more challenging, the realization that they would be expected to change. 3 months later, Clare Whitmore stepped into Seat 2A aboard Sky Vista Air's Flight 923 from Cascade City to Silver Point, dressed in the same understated outfit, dark gray sweatshirt, light gray joggers, and her black baseball cap. She slid her backpack under the seat, pulled out her paperback, and settled in for the 5-hour journey to a climate research conference. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," came a voice beside her. "Can I offer you something to drink before takeoff?" Claire looked up. Standing next to her, professional and composed, was Evan Brooks. His demeanor was warm but respectful. His eyes held none of the skepticism or superiority they had once carried, only sincerity. "Just water for now," Claire replied. Evan set the glass gently on her armrest, then hesitated. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't know if you remember me." Claire gave him a small, knowing smile. "I remember you, Evan." He gave a slight nod, acknowledging the impossibility of being forgotten. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "These last 3 months have changed me. Changed us." Claire studied him thoughtfully. "How was your time in the customer advocacy team?" "Humbling," he admitted. "I had no idea how many passengers felt dismissed or misjudged by us. Little things, offhand remarks, body language, tone. They notice everything, and they remember." "They usually do," Claire replied gently. Down the aisle, Lauren Hayes helped an elderly man stow a scuffed duffel bag in the overhead bin. She treated him with genuine care, chatting softly as she made sure he was comfortable. There was no condescension, only consideration. The transformation, though subtle, was unmistakable. "The training program you and Mr. Whitmore implemented," Evan continued, "it didn't just change procedures. It changed how we think. About passengers, about people." "I'm glad to hear that," Claire said. Evan straightened, the practiced polish of a first-class attendant returning to his posture. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Whitmore. If you need anything at all, I'm here to assist." As he moved down the aisle, Claire glanced toward the galley, where Camille Stratton was preparing for takeoff. Their eyes met briefly. Camille gave a small, respectful nod, not out of fear, but as a sign of genuine acknowledgement. The kind that comes not from obligation, but from growth. The changes at Sky Vista Air had gone far beyond one crew. The anti-bias training had been expanded company-wide, from ticket counters to executive offices. Customer satisfaction scores were climbing, and for the first time in years, employee morale was on the rise. Empowered by new leadership and a shared sense of accountability, staff felt supported to treat every traveler with equal dignity. Other airlines had taken notice too. Sky Vista's inclusive approach to premium service had begun sparking conversations across the industry. challenging long-held assumptions about what luxury really meant. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Claire leaned her head against the window, watching the checkerboard of landscapes pass far below. She thought back to that day, not with bitterness, but with clarity. What had begun as a moment of quiet injustice had grown into something far more powerful. Not vengeance, not public shame, but education, accountability, real change. Her phone buzzed in her lap. "Julian, how's the flight?" Claire smiled softly and typed back, "Different, better." A few rows ahead, a young woman in ripped jeans and a vintage t-shirt laughed at something her travel companion said. The two of them, seated in first class, received the same attentive service as the executives in suits around them. No second glances, no whispered doubts, no barriers made from assumptions. This, Claire realized, was the real victory. Not just her vindication, but the everyday dignity now offered to others who might have once been quietly pushed aside. As the young woman in ripped jeans laughed with her companion a few seats ahead, surrounded by suits and quiet professionals, Claire Whitmore watched with quiet satisfaction. No second glances, no sidelong looks, no subtle hints that they didn't belong. And that, she realized, was the true victory. Not the public reckoning, not the vindication of her own experience, but this, the small, everyday dignities now extended to people who might once have been judged, questioned, or dismissed. The seatbelt sign chimed off with a soft ding. A few moments later, Camille Stratton came rolling down the aisle with the beverage cart, her posture upright, her manner calm and approachable. There was no trace of stiffness, no exaggerated show of courtesy. She moved smoothly, greeting each passenger with warmth and equal attention, offering drinks with a quiet sincerity that felt new and real. When she reached Claire's seat, there was a pause. "Mrs. Whitmore," Camille said softly, almost hesitantly, "I want you to know what you and Mr. Whitmore did. It was fair, more than fair." Claire met her gaze, seeing not fear, but humility, growth. "It made us better," Camille continued, "at our jobs, and as people." Claire nodded gently. That was the point. Not punishment, progress. Camille exhaled, something releasing in her shoulders. "I've learned to see people differently, to question my assumptions, and not just on flights, everywhere." Claire smiled, her voice soft. "That's where real change begins." Camille gave a respectful nod before moving on, continuing down the aisle with the same care she'd shown to Claire. As the aircraft gently banked westward toward Silver Point, Claire turned back to the window, watching the late afternoon light spread like melted gold across the patchwork earth below. Every square of farmland and winding road beneath her reminded her of where she'd come from, and why this mattered. Change didn't always come from loud protests or grand announcements. Sometimes it came from moments like this: a choice, a question, a challenge, a decision to see people differently. It came from systems built to encourage better choices, from leadership willing to address not just symptoms, but causes. And it came from people like Camille, who had looked at their own reflections and chosen to evolve. This flight, Claire knew, carried far more than travelers from one place to another. It carried parents and students, CEOs and retirees, artists and dreamers, all equally deserving of respect. It carried a quiet revolution in the way humanity showed up for one another. She reached down and checked her phone. A message from Julian had just come through. "How's the flight?" Claire smiled, fingers tapping gently as she replied, "Different, better." 2 rows ahead, a woman in a vintage band tee leaned her head against the window. Her partner, in a worn hoodie, was laughing quietly. They sipped sparkling water from crystal glasses in first class, treated not like outsiders or exceptions, but like guests. Claire smiled again. This wasn't just her win, it was theirs. As Sky Vista Air continued rolling out its company-wide anti-bias training, ripple effects followed. Customer satisfaction soared, staff morale stabilized, Executives noticed a shift, not just in service, but in culture. Other airlines began to watch closely. Some even adopted similar models, quietly revising training protocols and feedback systems. For an industry long steeped in visual judgments and status symbols, it was a small but powerful step toward inclusion. The story of a woman in sweatpants who owned nothing more than her dignity and refused to trade it for silence became a quiet legend in Sky Vista's corporate memory. But for Claire, it was never about legend. It was about life, about humanity. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the quiet hum of the engine settle over her. And in that moment, she understood something else. The true victory wasn't that she could now fly first class without question. It was that, little by little, everyone else could too.